The last thing Eli Marsh did before the end of the world was argue about a parking space. He was standing in the gravel lot outside the Henley Road chippy, stills in his dressing gown, a half-eaten piece of battered cod going cold in his hand, when the sky turned the color of a bad bruise. He'd been awake for 11 minutes. In that time he had burned his toast, discovered the boiler was dead again, and received a council's notice that the entire row of houses on Marsh Lane, including his, number 14, the one his grandfather had built, was to be demolished by 9 o'clock this morning to make way for a new municipal pedestrian pathway connecting the Tesco car park to the leisure center. He'd been arguing with the council foreman for 6 of those 11 minutes. "You can't just knock it down," Eli said.
"I've lived there my whole life."
"Plans were posted," the foreman said, not unkindly. 30 days ago. Public notice board. Library. "I don't go to the library." Well, he was still forming his next protest when a hand grabbed his elbow and pulled him toward the alley behind the chip shop. The hand belonged to a woman named Sarah Voss, who until approximately 40 seconds ago he had known as his neighbor from number 12. Quietly odd, fond of odd hours, always carrying a battered electronic device that looked like someone had tried to build a tablet computer with components salvaged from 3 different decades. "Sarah, what?" "Don't talk," she said. "Look up." He looked up. The bruise in the sky had spread edge to edge, and now, resolving from its dark center like something enormous being born out of shadow, he could see the shapes. Hundreds of them, each one the size of a city block, flat-bottomed and immense, sliding silently into formation over the whole of the horizon with the calm, unhurried deliberateness of something that had done this many, many times before. Eli said, "Are those construct fleet? Designation 7. Sarah was tapping at her device with one thumb. "They're here for the planet. They're..." He watched one of the ships drift overhead, close enough that he could see the rust-brown scoring on its hull, the geometry of its exhaust ports, the utterly indifferent ugliness of its design. Truth. It looked like a building that had been dropped from a great height and decided to keep moving. "Do you mean, for the planet?" "Same reason the council wants your house. They need the space. There's a conduit being routed through this solar system. Your planet is in the way." She looked up from the device. Eyes in the half-dark were very steady. "I am sorry, Eli, I genuinely am. I kept hoping they'd reroute. You knew. I've known for about 3 years. In the forms." She held up the device. On its cracked screen, columns of characters in an alphabet he didn't recognize scrolled past at speed. "The appeals process is extraordinary. 14 levels of bureaucratic review. I made it to level 11, he stared at her. "My name isn't Sarah Voss," she said. "My name takes about 4 seconds to pronounce in your language, and most humans find it uncomfortable, so Voss is fine. I'm from a system about 60 light years from here. I've been on this planet for 9 years doing research." "Research? You're a fascinating species." She said it without condescension, which somehow made it worse. "Come on. We have about 4 minutes before the sequence initiates and the construct relay locks this sector. There's a cargo hauler in the secondary formation, 3rd row, the one with the irregular lateral markings. I know the docking protocol. If we can get aboard, we can ride out in the lower freight hold. And they won't even notice us."
"Probably."
Eli looked at the chip shop. He looked at the street he'd walked every day of his life. He looked at his dressing gown, which had a small picture of a fox on the pocket, because his mother had given it to him for Christmas 4 years ago. "Let me get shoes," he said. "There isn't time." The sky lit up, all at once, like someone throwing a switch. A sound came with it. Not a sound exactly, more like the memory of a sound. A pressure changed deep in the ears that made the teeth ache. Then the ships opened up, and the light was everywhere. Eli ran. The inside of a construct cargo hauler smells like bureaucracy. This was Eli's first coherent thought after the docking sequence. A stomach-inverting displacement that Sarah described as ruly equivalent to being turned inside out and then back again, except the second step doesn't quite complete, deposited them in a freight bay the size of an aircraft hangar. The smell was industrial, synthetic, deeply impersonal. Stacked containers filled most of the space, each one sealed and tagged with those same incomprehensible characters. A low amber light pulsed from strips along the ceiling. Something in the walls made a sound like distant, filing cabinets being opened and closed. Touch anything, Sarah said. Don't speak above a whisper. Whatever you do, do not let them read you their administrative notices. Their what? A door at the far end of the bay slid open. The construct were tall. That was the first thing. They were tall and they were the color of old concrete, and they moved with the ponderous, deliberate efficiency of something that had never once in its evolutionary history needed to hurry. Their faces, if you could call them faces, were broad and flat, with small eyes set wide apart, and expressions that communicated absolutely nothing, because expressions, for the construct, were a waste of processing resources that could be better spent on administrative review. There were 3 of them. They stopped when they saw Eli and Sarah, and they looked at them for a long moment with those small, flat eyes. Then the lead one reached into a compartment on its torso and produced a document. The document was very thick. It appeared to be printed on some material that was neither paper nor plastic, and it was bound with something that looked like a staple the size of Eli's forearm. By authority of the Galactic Infrastructure Commission, Subdirective 9947-B, the construct began, in a voice like a very large stone being dragged across concrete. You are hereby notified. Sarah closed her eyes. That your presence aboard this vessel constitutes a Class 7 transit violation under Bylaw 412 of the Hyperspace Corridor Alignment Protocols, which were ratified at the 7th Assembly of the Interstellar Development Council, minutes of which are available upon request in 47 languages, none of which are yours. The reading took 11 minutes. Eli stood very still throughout. He discovered during this time that it was possible to experience every possible register: terror, grief, bewilderment, a strange floating calm, more terror, and arrive eventually at something that felt less like acceptance than like the temporary failure of all feeling. He thought about his grandfather's house. He thought about the fox on the dressing gown. He thought, with sudden and inappropriate clarity, about a book he'd read as a child where a rabbit watches his home being built over, and how his mother had cried at the ending, and he hadn't understood why until now. At which point, the construct concluded, you will be ejected from this vessel in accordance with standard non-citizen removal protocol. Thank you for your understanding. A survey regarding your ejection experience will be transmitted to your communications device within 10 business days. We don't have communications devices, Sarah said. The construct looked at her. Then it made a small notation on the document. That has been recorded, it said. They were not ejected immediately, as it turned out. The construct were thorough. There was additional paperwork, forms to be completed, fingerprints taken, a biometric catalog that required Eli to stand very still while a device hummed over him for 4 minutes, and the construct operating it made 3 separate notations in its ledger. At one point a second, more senior construct arrived and reviewed the original paperwork and found a procedural irregularity in Clause 14 of the ejection notice, which had to be reissued. Eli spent this time watching Sarah work. She was subtle about it, he almost didn't notice. While the construct were occupied with their paperwork, her fingers moved over that battered device with the focused precision of someone who had spent years getting very good at something no one was watching. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at the construct, tracking their positions, their focus, the rhythm of their bureaucratic attention. Are you doing? He murmured. Filing an appeal, she said. Level 12. You said you only made it to 11. I also said probably. When they were finally walked to the ejection bay, a small pressurized chamber near the ship's stern, perfectly sized for 2 humans or 1 construct with moderate luggage, Eli looked out through the viewport in the bay door. Stars, black space, the distant geometry of the fleet in formation, ships lined up like vast, ugly dominoes across the void. Happens when they open the door? He asked. Standard non-citizen removal protocol, Sarah said. We get approximately 29 seconds before exposure becomes non-survivable. That's very specific. The construct are very thorough. And then? She looked at the device. Something on the screen had changed. A new column of text, a different character set. Expression shifted, just slightly, in a way that Eli was only beginning to learn to read. Then we find out if level 12 worked, she said. The door opened. Space is very cold and very silent. This is something humans know abstractly, in the way they know that the sun is 93 million miles away, as a fact that lives in the mind but not in the body. The body encountering space learns it differently. Eli's lungs locked. The cold wasn't cold exactly. It was the absence of every sensation he had ever associated with warmth or air, or their continuity of being alive, arriving all at once. Then something arrived. It came from nowhere, or rather from everywhere at once, because probability at this range had become very strange. Ship, not a construct ship. Something smaller, sleeker, built along lines that suggested someone had designed it quickly, with enormous intelligence, in the grip of a deadline. It moved like a thought. It was just there, the way a solution to a problem is sometimes just there, and its docking bay was open, and Eli and Sarah fell into it. Air light, the feeling of walls. Eli sat on the floor of an unfamiliar ship and breathed. Ship was called the Incidents, and its pilot introduced herself as Luma without explaining what she was piloting toward or why, because she said, still working that out. She was short and dark, and had the distracted energy of someone who had been given 17 tasks simultaneously and was completing them in an order determined by pure intuition. There were 3 other people on the ship. A large, quietly furious man named Brecht, who appeared to be from somewhere that no longer existed. All known, who was currently sizzled below the waist and appeared entirely unbothered by this. A machine. The machine sat in the corner of the main cabin and did not move. It was roughly humanoid, slightly shorter than Eli, built in a style that suggested considerable engineering capability deployed in service of a form that had somehow never managed to achieve grace. Its surface was a flat gray-green. Its face, and it did have a face, wore an expression of such complete and absolute misery that Eli found himself involuntarily feeling sorry for it. "Cats," Luma said. Cognitive Autonomous System Shell. Cognitive processing approximately equivalent to several research universities. Emotional processing approximately equivalent to someone who has been awake for 9 years at a funeral. "Hello," Cass said, in a voice that managed to make a single syllable sound like a small concession to a universe that did not deserve it. "Cass is very helpful," Luma said. "I am aware of my utility," Cass said. "I have cataloged it extensively. The list is very long. None of it helps." "Right," Eli said. "Your planet has been destroyed," Cass said. "Case you weren't aware. I monitored the sequence. The demolition was completed in approximately 4 minutes. Efficiency rating, very high. I have been destroyed 3 times in the last 800 years. It does not get easier. Nothing does." Eli sat down next to the machine. He didn't know why. Something about the posture, maybe. The way it was sitting with its arms resting on its knees and its flat head tilted very slightly downward, like a person waiting at a bus stop that they have come to believe will never arrive. "Eli," he said. "I know," Cass said. "Sarah transmitted your biometric data when she filed the appeal. A structural engineer. You specialize in load-bearing restorations, old buildings." A pause. "I find this relevant." "Why?" "Because you understand that something can be broken and still hold. That the structure survives the damage if you know where the strength actually lives." The machine's flat eyes found his. They were, he realized, calibrated to something very close to human expressiveness. Close enough to read, not close enough to be comfortable. "I think you are going to need that understanding before this is over." He didn't ask what it meant. Somehow, he already knew the answer would require more information than he currently had. The construct did not leave. This was the thing that no one outside the fleet corridors fully understood about the Galactic Infrastructure Commission and its demolition protocols. They were not a military force. They were an administrative one. The construct did not conquer. They did not occupy. They demolished, surveyed, cataloged, and filed, and when they were done, they moved on. But the conduit they were laying through this sector, a hyperspace arterial route that would, in about 400 years, carry traffic between 6-star systems, required an anchor point, a node. Something stable and sufficiently massive to serve as the physical substrate for the relay architecture. They had chosen the Earth's moon. This was from their perspective elegant. The planet was gone. The moon was still there. Geologically stable, the right density. already conveniently stripped of its gravitational companion. They filed the necessary paperwork, a work order running to some 6,000 pages, and dispatched an engineering team. Sarah found this out from her device, 40 minutes after they came aboard the incidents. She told Eli. Eli told Luma. Luma stood very still for a moment and then said, "Huh? Huh?" Eli said, "The relay anchor. If they complete it, the conduit is permanent. This region of space becomes a thoroughfare. The traffic alone will destabilize the outer planets over about 2,000 years." She picked up something that looked like a calibration tool and turned it over in her hands. If the anchor fails, the conduit fails. And if the conduit fails at this stage, the commission has to reroute, which takes about 40 years and costs. She did something with her lips that might have been a smile. "Quite a lot." "So we need the anchor to fail," Eli said. "The anchor is being built in a moon. By the construct, with their engineering teams and their equipment and their 6,000-page work order." "Right. And we are 7 people on a medium-range courier vessel with a functional weapon system and a machine that has told me 3 times today that nothing matters." "Nothing matters in the long run," Cass said from the corner. "In the short run, things matter locally. Distinction is philosophically important." "The point," Luma said, not unkindly, "is that it's not obvious what we do." Eli looked at Sarah. She was still watching her device, scrolling through something. She looked up and found him watching her. "Level 12 was rejected," she said. "Procedural grounds." 14 again. "The same clause?" "The construct are very consistent." He thought about the foreman in the chippy car park, the public notice board. The plans were posted 30 days ago. He thought about all the times in his career he'd been brought in to look at a building someone wanted to demolish. A church, a factory, an old hotel, and been asked to confirm that it was unsalvageable, only to find that the thing holding it together wasn't the walls at all. It was one beam, one joint. Ancient, unremarkable piece of engineering, buried deep in the structure, where no one had thought to look. "How do the construct file their work orders?" he asked. Sarah looked up. "Do you mean?" "The work order for the relay anchor. 6,000 pages. Is that all one document? Is it filed in sections?" She was very still for a moment. "Sections," she said. "Each phase of construction requires its own submission. The commission won't authorize the next phase until the previous submission is reviewed and stamped." "And who reviews it?" "The regional construct administrator, the one assigned to this sector. And if there's a procedural irregularity in the submission, they can't proceed until it's corrected." She was looking at him differently now. "Ely, I'm a structural engineer," he said. "I've spent 20 years reading construction documents. I know what a load-bearing clause looks like. I know what happens when the paperwork says the wall goes here, but the wall needs to go there." He paused. "Show me their work order." What followed was 12 hours that Eli would later describe, to anyone who asked, as the most concentrated work of his life. The work order was not technically available to non-commissioned personnel. Sarah had 9 years of accumulated access to peripheral construct administrative systems, the kind of access you build up slowly, filing appeal after appeal, navigating form after form, until you understand the shape of a bureaucracy, the way a locksmith understands the inside of a lock. She got them in. The document was 6,042 pages. Eli read every one. Cass helped. The machine had, it turned out, a perfect memory and a processing speed that made Eli feel briefly and uncharitably stupid, but it also had, and this was the thing he hadn't expected, an extraordinary instinct for the kind of detail that mattered, the kind of weight-bearing detail buried in a document that most readers, assuming it was standard, would pass right over. "Clause 887, Cass said at one point, at about the 3-hour mark. "Foundation anchoring specification. The tolerances listed here are for a body with lunar density range of 3.2 to 3.4 grams per cubic centimeter. Earth's moon is 3.34, Eli said. Yes. The construct surveyed this system's moon from a distance of 400 kilometers, which is their standard protocol, and they rounded to 3.3. Eli stared at the screen. "That's outside the specified range," he said. "By a margin of 0.04 grams per cubic centimeter, yes. Is, in itself, within acceptable engineering error for most construction types." Cass's voice was, if anything, even more desolate than usual. If you read Clause 215, subsection on gravitational loading during Phase 2 anchor deployment, the specified tolerance for that phase requires the figure to be within 0.02 of the survey measurement. A pause that felt almost anticipatory. The survey measurement was 3.3, the actual density is 3.34, which means the figure used in the Phase 2 load calculations is already 0.004 outside the actual value, and the Phase 2 clause requires figures within 0.02 of the survey measurement. But the survey measurement is itself wrong. The Phase 2 submission is internally inconsistent, Eli said slowly. Yes, that's a procedural irregularity, a significant one. The Commission's own standards require that when a dimensional survey value is found to be inconsistent with the actual physical parameters of the construction substrate, the entire phase must be resubmitted with corrected figures. And when Phase 2 is resubmitted, Phases 3 through 9 automatically revert to pending status, because each one references the Phase 2 load calculations. Eli sat back. How long does resubmission take? Under Commission standard processing times, approximately 18 months per phase, 7 phases, times 18 months. Eli thought about a beam in a wall. The thing holding everything up that no one had looked at. He thought about Clause 14, the one that had snagged Sierra's appeal twice. He went back to the document. He found it. He read it 3 times. Then he started to laugh. It was not a large laugh. It was the kind of laugh that a person produces when something absurd and terrible turns out to also be, in some very specific way, the solution to a different absurd and terrible problem. Sarah looked up from her screen. Cass tilted its head at an angle of approximately 5 degrees. 14, Eli said. In the ejection notice, the one they served us, Clause 14 says that any ejected non-citizen who files a counterclaim to the ejection within the administrative window. Which I didn't, Sarah said. I was filing the appeal. Right, but it also says that any counterclaim filed against the ejecting vessel must be logged against the vessel's current registered work order. He looked at her. Sarah, we were ejected from a construct cargo hauler. That hauler is part of the fleet assigned to the Relay Anchor project. Its work order is the Relay Anchor work order. She was very still. A counterclaim filed against the hauler, she said carefully, would require the work order to be reviewed for validity before the counterclaim could be processed. And if the work order contains a material inconsistency, construction has to halt pending resolution. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, something behind them had changed. The way a room changes when someone opens a window. Ellie, the administrative window for the counterclaim is 72 hours from ejection. He looked at the timestamp on his device. We have 41 hours. I need 30 minutes, she said, and her fingers were already moving. The filing of a Galactic Infrastructure Commission counterclaim, Class 7, against Construct Cargo Hauler Designation Fleet 7, Registration Echo Naught 7, citing material inconsistency in Phase 2 of Work Order 6042, took Sarah 28 minutes. Eli sat next to her and read out the relevant clause numbers. Cass provided supporting calculations. At one point, Brecht came in, looked at what they were doing, and went away again without saying anything, which seemed to be a form of approval. Luma received the transmission confirmation at the same time as the construct administrator assigned to the sector. They waited. The fleet did not move. The engineering team on the moon continued working. Eli watched through the incidence's forward viewport as the small lights of their equipment moved in slow, methodical patterns across the lunar surface. 6 hours later, the administrator's response came through. It was as construct administrative responses tended to be, very long. Sarah read it in silence, then she translated. Construction of Phase 2 is suspended pending review of the dimensional survey inconsistency. Phase 2 work order has been flagged for resubmission. Phases 3 through 9 are automatically in abeyance, pending Phase 2 resolution. Estimated review timeline, 14 to 21 months per phase, Eli counted. At minimum, he said. 7 phases at 14 months each. 8 years, Cass said. At minimum. That's not a conduit, Luma said from the doorway. That's a project so delayed they'll reroute. She looked at Eli for a long time. You did that with a form. The structure was already wrong, Eli said. I just found where. There was a silence. Outside, the fleet lights were shifting. The engineering team's equipment was powering down. The construct did not leave angry. They did not leave anything, as far as Eli could tell. They simply filed the appropriate documentation for a Phase 2 suspension, transmitted it to the regional office, and began the process of withdrawing the construction equipment in the orderly, unhurried manner of something that had an appointment somewhere else and had already made a note to follow up. He watched them go from the viewport. All of him ached in a way that had nothing to do with muscles. The planet they demolished was still gone. His grandfather's house was gone. The chippy on Henley Road hurt. The fox on the dressing gown pocket, which had presumably ceased to exist in the same 4-minute window as everything else. Cass came to stand beside him. The machine stood very still and said nothing for a while, which was unusual. "You know," it said at last, in its perpetual register of gentle catastrophic sorrow, "I have watched 11 planets be demolished in my functional lifetime. 9 of them had no one aboard a courier vessel with a working knowledge of civil engineering, and a very old grievance about a council notice." "I had help," Eli said. "Yes." Cass was quiet again. "The two are not mutually exclusive." Eli put his hand on the machine's arm, which was cold and slightly textured, and entirely different from any material he'd touched before. The machine did not react exactly. Something in its posture shifted. Very small, very subtle, in a direction that he thought might be, in its own mechanical and profoundly melancholy register. Something like gratitude. Sarah found him later, sitting against the hull in the lower storage bay, with the light down low and his knees pulled up. "Level 13, she said. He looked up. She was holding her device out to him. On the screen was a form, long, complex, dense, with those characters he still couldn't read. At the top, in text that had been translated, probably for his benefit, he could make out: "Notice of retroactive habitat loss. Appeal for compensatory rights and relocation, filed on behalf of surviving citizens of Demolished World. Soul Eye." "It's a long shot," she said. "The Commission doesn't usually recognize individual species claims unless the species has a registered representative in the Galactic Administrative System. And we don't. You didn't." She sat down next to him, cross-legged, the device on her knees. "A species that successfully filed a material inconsistency counterclaim against a construct work order and had it upheld. That species has demonstrated administrative competence under Commission law. Means you qualify for provisional recognition. A beat. The appeal may take years. Probably will. The Commission is very slow." "I know," Eli said. "I've met the construct." "Yes," she smiled. It transformed her face entirely, in the way of smiles that have been kept mostly in reserve. "But the claim exists now. It's filed. It's in the system. It can't be unfiled." She looked at the device. "That's something." He thought about his mother crying at the end of the rabbit book. The warren destroyed. The rabbits scattered. The long journey through unknown country. He'd asked her why she was crying and she'd said, "They keep going. That's why. Not because it ends well. Just because they keep going." "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Nothing yet." Eventually, a statement of intent. "Something that establishes you as a species representative." She paused. "Possibly someone who can read construction documents, because the Commission files are very long." "I can do that," he said. Outside, the fleet was gone. The stars were old light, arriving from distances so large that the numbers involved stopped meaning anything to human intuition. The moon hung in the viewport, still, there a little worn around the edges, from whatever the construct's equipment had managed before the halt order came through. He'd never noticed before what color it was, not white, gray-white maybe, or the pale silver of old concrete. Something that had been made, and had been there a long time and intended to go on being there. He hadn't saved it exactly. He'd filled in a form. He'd read a document carefully. He'd known what a load-bearing clause looked like, because someone taught him. Because humans have always been like that. Passing knowledge across time in the hope that whoever gets it on the other end will find a use. He thought, well, it's a start. He thought, Clause 14. He thought, we have always been here, in one form or another, stubborn, and small, and very annoying to deal with administratively, crawling around in the corners of things looking for the beam that holds the wall up. He thought, we probably have a long way to go, he thought. Probably. Cass appeared in the doorway. The machine stood for a moment in the low light, its flat gray-green surface absorbing the glow, its expression carrying its customary cargo of infinite, bottomless, somehow oddly companionable despair. The others are asking if anyone wants to eat, it said. Yeah, Eli said. Yeah, I could eat. He stood up. His knees protested, still technically wearing a dressing gown, which remained in some ways the most surreal element of the entire day. Cass, he said. Yes, do you? Is there anything you want? Eat or? I do not require sustenance, the machine said. My systems are self-maintaining. I will, however, come and stand in the room if that is acceptable. A pause. I find it less. It is better than standing somewhere alone. Yeah, Eli said. Me too, actually. He held the door open. The machine walked through. They went to find the others. The incidents moved on through a universe that was very large and very old, and, in the places where it intersected with human stubbornness and misplaced attention to detail, somewhat less manageable than its administrators would have preferred. Somewhere in a very large filing system, a claim sat pending, patient as an old building, waiting for the process to run its course. Take years, probably decades. Eli Marsh had read 6,042 pages of construction documents in 12 hours. He had the time.